He was the first child about heroin.
We promise we're serious journalists. Welcome to Mad That with Harry and Carl.
Hello and welcome to Mad That, brought to you by Have Word Studios. I'm Harry Robinson.
I'm Carl Riegler.
And if you like what we're doing here, make sure to like, subscribe.
Do all that. Like, subscribe, comment. This is Series 1. In Series 2, if you've got an idea of a guest who you know, please drop it below. We will listen. We will reach out to them. So, yeah.
And we can get in touch with anyone, as we
Anybody.
famously proven.
I mean, he's proved, you see the guests in this season, the people he's got. Next, what are we getting next? We're going to go for the Queen.
The Queen, the Pope.
The Pope, yeah.
King Henry VIII.
King Henry VIII.
He's coming on season 3.
That's the first 3 episodes. So what you want to see after that, comment below. And go and check our socials out. Go and check Have a Word socials out. And yeah, if you like what we're doing, tell us. We're narcissists. We like to know.
We're going to jump into the intro, which is going to be recorded immediately after we've finished talking to today's guest.
Yes.
So just enjoy that. Understand that that's the context for it. And just dive right into it. Hope you enjoy.
Nice one. People want the high five. There's your high five.
There's your high five. Yeah, this is a weird one because this is one we're recording after a couple episodes of Mad That has.
Yes, we've seen 5 episodes worth of feedback on Mad That, which, by the way, thank you so much. It's been like overwhelming at points. And we've seen the feedback of, oh, the intros are too long, whatever. You know, we're new at this and we're going to get better.
Absolutely.
And we think this format works. And, you know, we're going to stick with it. And we promise we're going to refine it and it'll get better. Series 2 will be even better.
It'll evolve and yeah, we'll learn from.
Totally. And we are seeing all of your feedback and we listen to it all. But this is the Neil Woods episode. It's just finished. And it was fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we kind of mentioned it later on, but he's a man of two sides a little bit, and you'll see that he'll talk about his kind of activism work now, but he'll also talk about the countless stories he has from being an undercover police officer. Yeah. There were points there where me and you were just kind of agape, like I'm
just gripped,
just staring at him telling these stories.
You say something, and he's like, "Right, I have an insane story there." Bam, and it.
Yeah. And he didn't even realise he was. It's not like he was. Neil's not a man that does loads and loads of kind of press or whatever. Obviously, he does a lot of kind of activism and a lot of interviews in that regard. You know, but he's not trying to be a YouTuber or anything.
So interesting. And, we could have easily done another hour. We ended on a point there that we could have went another hour on. He's so listenable. He's so erudite. It was just such a good episode. Who is Neil Woods? Quickly for a little intro.
So Neil Woods is a former undercover drugs police officer. He used to pose as kind of a heroin addict, or he'd you know, try and work his way up kind of gangs to try and then, you know, scope out and ultimately put into prison people who were in kind of gang warfare, who were dealing drugs. And then he started that in 1993. In 2007, he left the police and he had a shift where he believed in, he felt that the war on drugs was unwinnable. Ultimately, because like it's very Darwinian, like the people in the war on drugs will develop and then work out how the police do one thing and then they get more violent. And he thought it was the police's the police success in the war on drugs was detrimental to society,
which is such a mad way to think about it. But he speaks about it so perfectly that you understand it. And now he's trying to change the war on drugs in a totally different way. And personally, I couldn't disagree with him. He was great, and you're gonna love this episode.
Yeah, but as always, leave comments or whatever. This is the penultimate episode of season 1. If you have ideas for what you want us to do, maybe bridging the gap between season 1 and season 2. If you
got some ideas, though, haven't we?
We have got some ideas, but if you want some kind of Mad That content that's slightly different to the seasoned episodes, let us know. Yep. We've loved every minute.
Oh, it's been. I mean, I know that it seems like a roundup because this is the last record.
We've got one
record
big bastard in the back.
We've got fucking the big fella next week. You know who he is. And thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for all the messages, the comments, the likes, everything you've done. We read it all, and it genuinely has blown us away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, one last high five in the room for us. Enjoy the episode.
Let's get it.
So Neil, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
We're great. I mean, we've had a bit of a hectic day.
Yeah, this is record number 2, but we're raring to go.
Absolutely. Good. We'll jump straight into it then. So a question we like to kind of ask with all of our guests. Obviously, it can be quite easy, like when describing you as a guest, to define you as a former undercover police officer or now like a member of LEAP, like with your kind of drug work and stuff like that. But to you, who is Neil Woods?
I'm a full-time activist. I'm a social justice activist. That's how I identify. Sometimes, depending on mood, I'll identify as a fanatic because I'm a genuine activist in the fact that the energy that I put into this activism has made me neglect friends, family, and finances. So I think that adequately defines me as an activist. But some people might call me a fanatic. So whichever you want, really. An obsessive activist. Let's put it that way.
Let's give some context then. So, what are you obsessed over? What are you fanatical about? Where does your energy go?
Well, as a police officer, I saw myself as fighting organised crime, trying to make society safer from the corrupting influence of organised crime. And of course, I was a bit slow, to be fair. It took me many years for it to actually sink in that the work I was doing was actually making society more dangerous. It was empowering organised crime. It was sharpening the sword of organised crime, actually. It was allowing organised crime to adapt, to become more ruthless, to become more effective, to become more monopolised. And so actually all of the work that I did, all of the energy that went into it just made things worse. And this is the truth about drugs policing everywhere in the world. So now I suppose I'm trying to mitigate that and make things better. I'm still fighting organised crime. That's what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to save lives because drugs can be dangerous and drugs are killing people, but drugs are killing people because they're not regulated, because they're controlled by organised crime and not governments and doctors. So I'm trying to change this international disastrous set of laws, these disastrous set of treaties, which means that we have this war on drugs. And I'm trying to end the war on drugs as part of a wider movement. Of course, I'm not trying to do this on my own. Thankfully, there's quite a few good people in this team working towards the same thing. But essentially trying to take control of drugs away from criminals and give it to more responsible actors.
So, I mean, you're someone who knows the war on drugs very well. You're someone who has been fighting in amongst, many different roles in the war on drugs. Obviously, you used to be an undercover drugs kind of police officer. Could you talk us through how you got into that line of work and I guess your first steps into that like wild world of going undercover?
Yeah, sure. I was a uniform police officer, but I was a uniform police officer a little bit too young. I didn't really realize how young I was until I had that uniform on and I was on the streets. And because I always thought I could reason with anybody. And then, I quickly discovered that you can't reason with everybody. They will still want to continue to punch you. This is something I had to learn as a young 19-year-old, that you can't rationalize with everybody, especially not drunken people. So I struggled being a police officer, to be honest. I just wasn't very good at it. But then I managed to hang on. I improved a little bit. 4 years in, I got an attachment to the drug squad. Well, that was quite strange for a young cop to get an attachment to such a squad at the time. And the reason was that there was the mother of all moral panics in the UK. Everyone was panicked about crack cocaine. And the reason for that is that all the tabloid newspapers have been running stories about how crack cocaine was ruining America, with an emphasis on black communities in our tabloid newspapers as well, I should add. And so the British public were whipped up into this frenzy of fear before we even had any crack. Mm-hmm. So at the moment that we did, there was this feedback loop between journalism and politics, which often happens. Politicians believe they can win votes by saying how tough they can be. And we see this pattern repeated over and over, and no one actually looks at the evidence. They just look at the messaging and use drug policy to bash the opposition with. So we had a massive investment in drugs policing, huge investment. Chief constables were told that this was your number one priority. And so each constabulary was looking at ways of becoming more efficient and better at following the Home Office's mandate. And that's where I stepped in as a young cop, being told to learn what the drug squad do. And when I was there, one of them said, "Do you fancy having a go at buying some crack cocaine?" And it wasn't a question I was expecting at all. So I said yes, as any stupid young man probably would. And there was an observation point set up quite quickly. I was given the £20 note, pointed at this door, and I went to knock on this door, and this huge guy answered it and said, "Who are you? You're not a student, are you? I fucking hate students." And I looked into his eyes and I thought, actually, I don't know who I am, because I hadn't thought of a cover story. I've just come to knock on your door.
Yeah.
And so I quickly had to think, oh yeah, I'm meant to be undercover here. I had to pretend. And I thought, that'll do. I'll tell him I'm a student. I says, "Yeah, I am a student." And he says, "Are you stupid? I just told you I hate students." But he found it funny. And actually, the point of that story is that it wasn't that difficult, because he held his hand out. He let me choose which little paper twist of crack I wanted. And as I was walking away, he said, "Hey, you take care now. Don't get yourself arrested."
Wow.
Which I thought was really considerate.
Yeah.
He cared.
The point is that it wasn't that difficult the first time, because at that point in British history, that kind of low-level undercover work didn't happen. We had sophisticated, high-level undercover work, which had been going on since the 60s or whenever, but not this kind of undercover work where you just had to make your own way. And the drug squad's eyes lit up, because this was a way of getting easy numbers quickly. And so in no time at all, I was traveling on loan to different drug squads around the country. First of all, it was a few days operation, then it was a few weeks. And of course, that first guy went to prison, and suddenly everyone knew that the cops might be on your doorstep. So it instantly got more difficult. And it became more than just knocking on someone's door. It became more sophisticated undercover work, because it had to be. Because organised crime adapted, so the police had to adapt. And nowadays I look at it not really as a war on drugs, but as an arms race.
Yeah.
Because this, to quote The Wire, this ain't no war. Wars end. But there is no end. There's just an arms race. It's just a perpetual arms race of the police developing, organised crime adapting, organised crime becoming more violent, the marketplace becoming more competitive. And now, of course, in the UK, we have the ultimate adaptation of children being used.
Yeah, like county lines.
Yeah, county lines. The adults are being caught by undercover cops. The adults are being caught by the use of informants. And the use of children is the perfect defense against these things, because you can't get a child in a cell and say, "Give us some information," or you're getting 10 years in prison, because the child knows he's not getting any prison, because the adult who employs him has told him he's not. Or I should say employed, I should say groomed and exploited and traumatized is what I should say, because that's what's happening to these children. So now we have 50,000 children on the front line in that marketplace that I used to operate. And they're being traumatized, and they're the next generation of traumatized people. They're the next generation of ruthless gangsters. Some of them will be. They're the next generation of problematic heroin users, because they've been traumatized as children. And we've done this. I've done this, actually.
Yeah. Well, you haven't. You're also helping fixing it. So let's not. You can point the finger at others. I've got a really maybe an ignorant question. So we're all aware of the film Training Day. Have you seen the film Training Day? Denzel Washington.
Training Day. Oh yeah, brilliant film.
So, as somebody who's so involved in the drug scene, do you have to be aware of what drugs do? Do you have to try them? Do you have to know everything about the drug? So, in the film, obviously, they try the drugs because he's like, you need to get to learn what this is like. Is that true? Do you have to know what they are?
I was I'm a real geek with anything. I'm wondering nowadays if it's some elements of neurodiversity. But if I decide that I need to know something, I need to know everything, and I go down rabbit holes. I get very obsessive. So I quickly learned everything I could about drugs. But I didn't have to take them. No, that wasn't part of my education, and it never would be, because that wouldn't be a part of the regulations to do so. Having said that, there were several occasions when I worked undercover that I did have to take drugs.
Yeah.
There's a few times that I had to use cannabis, just because it would have put me in danger if I wasn't doing. There was even a time when I had to use amphetamine, and oh God, that wasn't a pleasant occasion. Basically, I made a really stupid mistake in about 1997, something like that. A really stupid mistake, because I was infiltrating this pub where there was all sorts of decent level gangsters meeting in there, and they were talking about organized car theft, huge amounts of cocaine dealing. And I made myself out to be a connoisseur of amphetamines, which I'm not at all. I could talk about the difference between dexamphetamine and methamphetamine. Did I actually know it, really? Have I felt it? I'm afraid not. But I talked about it because it was something useful to talk to as my legend, right? Anyway, this main target of the operation came to me one day and says, "Hey, you, I've got a present for you." And he held up this little Sealy bag with this pink, toxic-looking goo in it. And my heart sunk a little bit. And he obviously saw my reticence, just a flash of reticence across my face. And I saw the flash of suspicion on his face. So I knew in that moment I had to put some fire on that, some water on that fire of suspicion and take some. I had to. I knew this. I knew I was suddenly at risk. So I put my little finger in and I had a dab. And he looked at me and said, "You're going to need more than that with your tolerance."
Oh my God.
Oh no.
So I put some more in, and within about 15, 20 minutes, I could feel this warm feeling in my stomach, and my heart was starting to pound. My face felt like it was blood red, you know? And I'd had a lot, because this was 40% pure as opposed to the normal 5% pure that was going around at the time. This was significantly strong stuff. I mean, I knew enough about the drug, I wasn't going to overdose. You actually need to take a hell of a lot of amphetamine to actually kill yourself. It's quite hard to kill yourself with it. Swallowing it anyway. But it wasn't pleasant. It was horrendous.
Do you remember what it tasted like?
It was so intense. It tasted, well, it smelt like the urine from a glue-sniffing cat. And it tasted like it tasted like battery acid. It was absolutely appalling. And I was so high and it was so angsty. And I didn't sleep properly for 3 nights. I had to get driven home. I certainly didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. Mind you, my house has never been so tidy.
When you're high, kind of in a undercover operation, obviously, like, I mean, I've been drunk before and then gone, oh God, I hope I don't say anything like embarrassing or whatever. Do you have that to the nth degree of like, oh, I hope I don't blow my cover, or I hope I don't say something that's going to give me up because I'm absolutely off my face?
Oh God, yeah, I felt fragile. I mean, the thing about working undercover is you have to trust your own judgment in the instant, and you get used to trusting your own judgment in the instant. So to have that interfered with, I mean, I hated even having to drink on an undercover job, because I'm quite good at handling my booze, but you don't want anything that's affecting your judgment, instant judgment. So yeah, it was horrible. But I got out of there quite quickly, to be honest. I made my excuses and got out there, and I declared to my team, "Hey, I'm absolutely fucked. I can't even drive." So I had to just quickly dictate my evidence, write something down. At the time, I was starting to shake, and I was not in a good place at all. I mean, so I haven't had to do it that often, but yeah, it does happen. Thankfully, I've never had to try heroin. That would have been scary. Although I did have to pretend to take heroin once. Someone was suspicious of me in Brighton, and he said, right, you're having my blowback. I don't trust you." Which meant he was going to inhale his heroin, and then he was going to blow it to me, and I was going to inhale his secondhand smoke. So I said, "Yeah, fine. Yeah, great." So I just puckered up and pretended to inhale, and like Bill Clinton, didn't inhale. And I was just hoping that they didn't see the smoke coming out the side of my mouth.
Wow. What do you think your, as a person, character traits lends you to becoming undercover? What do you think is the most important thing that you have to possess? Because obviously not everyone can do your job. Why do you think you're so good at it?
Well, I mean, like you say, not people have different skills, don't they? And they have different personalities which feed into the development of those skills. As I say, I wasn't a very good uniform cop. I struggled to learn within that environment and to work as a team. Compared with my peers, I really struggled. As soon as I went into undercover work, I was on my own. I only had to be responsible for my own thinking and my own actions, and that suited my personality, I think. I'm an introvert. And I'm also very obsessive about learning. So I instantly enjoyed the intellectual challenge of lying, for example. I enjoyed that development and constant self-review. I also used empathy because in order to fit in with that group of people, I had to learn about them and understand them and be able to put myself in their shoes. Nowadays, I refer to it as weaponizing empathy, which is what I did because I was using empathy, but not for something positive. It was actually so that I could better manipulate them. And on the fly, I was always learning how better to actually manipulate people, basically get people to do what I want, which is quite a ruthless way of developing one's personality and interaction with people. So I suppose I had a willingness to be ruthless as well. But also at the times when I was in danger, at the times, genuinely, because there's so many times I thought I was going to die. I mean, for example, the first times I thought I was going to die was on the same day, actually.
Wow.
I've been buying weights of heroin from this dealer in Stoke-on-Trent, and I thought he was fine with me. Knocked on his door one day, and he answered it with a samurai sword, and he put it to my throat. And he was screaming at me. He was blood red and saliva flying out of his mouth. He's saying, "You're drug squad. You're fucking drug squad, man. You're fucking 5-0." And I said, "Oh, didn't mean to hassle you, man." And I didn't know really what to say. But then eventually he started laughing, and this woman started laughing behind him. He was just winding me up. Or maybe he just wanted to try out his new sword or just remind me he was boss. I don't know. But then I ended up still having to negotiate with him and talk about what heroin I wanted and do a deal because I wanted 4 bags. So I had to switch into calm thinking very quickly. So I did the deal, walking away from his house, and then I look up and there's a knife pointing to my stomach. Someone's trying to rob me for the heroin that I'd just bought. And I thought, no. After what I've just been through for this, you are not having my smack. No way. So I sort of started running backwards. But the thing is, I learned from that experience and many other experiences where I thought we were going to die, is that for me, when I get that adrenaline surge, time seems to slow down for me. And I get the sensation of having all the time in the world to think. And it allows me to think clearly. And it's obviously a sensation of my thoughts speeding up using the adrenaline and that adrenal state of body and mind. But it meant that it was a tool I could develop and use, and I could help it develop my confidence because I knew in a moment of danger, I can think my way through it. And so I suppose that helped me become more confident at it. It also prompted me to put myself into more risky situations as well, because I was confident in doing so. And, I remember walking away after escaping the sword and the guy trying to rob me. And I went back to my backup team, and they were all like, "Wow, man, how can you look so calm and comfortable with that?" And as a young man, that really boosts your ego. And I was thinking, wow, am I one of those people? Am I one of those people who can cope with this shit? It really boosts your ego, especially as a young man. I mean, nowadays I realize that that I might have felt calm at the time, but it was giving drip by drip, it was giving me PTSD. So, all's well that ends well. But at the time, it was I saw it as a useful thing to develop my skills and abilities. So, I suppose somewhere in there is an answer to your question, but it was a bit. I was a bit all over the place with that.
That was a great answer. I think the ability to think under pressure is, surely the most useful one that I don't think I've got. I think if somebody put a samurai to my neck, what are you supposed to do in that situation? If your life feels threatened, at what point do you break, or do you break? Do you ever break?
You never break cover. That's the absolute golden rule.
So what happens though if your life is seriously, like, genuinely at risk? What's going through your head then? I'm just going to die for the cause.
Well, the thing is, working undercover, it's always down to you, and that's why I much prefer working on my own than with other people. So it's always down to your own decision making, and it has to be a judgment call. At what point am I safer, being honest, than the situation in which I find myself? But that's a judgment call, and I'll give you an example. So there was a time in Leicester in 2001 where it was near the end of a 7-month operation, and it was wrapping up. But a big dealer who I'd bought some heroin off right at the beginning, almost accidentally, right at the beginning of the operation. I'd got no corroborating evidence against him, because you only start wearing a camera or recording things when you feel safer. So there was no corroborating evidence. But whenever I phoned him up, he wouldn't come out, because it was just an accident that I dealt from him face to face. He used runners to use to secondary dealers. He wasn't hands-on. So in order to get some evidence, just to get him on footage so I could corroborate knowing him, etc., I arranged to sell him some counterfeit clothes. I knew he loved his clothes, so that's why he came out to meet me. But he came out to meet me with 2 huge gangsters that he worked with who didn't know me. So I'd got these fake Stone Island jackets, and he's looking at them. And when he said to me, he says, "Well, do you just want to sell me these, or are you after something?" And I says, "Well, if you carry him white, I'll have a 20 stone from you." So he gets in the car. He's the one person I know who trusts me. He gets in the car. He starts cutting this little piece of crack off this massive block. It's like a VHS tape for people who still remember, a massive block of crack, ridiculous size. And he's sat there cutting it off with a little razor blade. And his mate starts, suddenly pushes me against this metal railing. Now, I should set the scene. I'm in this big car park. I'm quite near the centre of Leicester city centre. But it's a huge car park, and it's virtually deserted. And I'm miles away from any safety. I'm right at one end of this car park. And he pushes me up against this metal railing and starts searching my clothes. And I'm not wearing James Bond tag. When he finds what he's found, it's pretty fucking obvious what he's found, because he finds this metal button in this denim jacket, old school denim jacket, with a little hole in it and a tiny little lens winking up at him.
Oh my God.
There's no doubt what it is, because who else drills a hole in a little metal stud, So he says, "He is as well, man." And he shouts at his mate, he's fucking 5'0". He's 5'0", man. And I'm thinking, shit. So in my mind, I go in that slowed down state of mind again. My brain just goes, ooh, I start thinking this through. I think I have got to stop him convincing the guy that I know of what he's found and what he believes. I've got to interrupt that communication. And I've got to move very, very slowly to escape, to make it look like I'm not trying to escape at the same time. So I launched into this torrent of verbal abuse at him and swearing at him. I said, "What are you doing picking at my fucking clothes? It's not even my jacket. I picked it up off the back of a chair this morning. It's Jackie's jacket. So what you do?" And I'm just swearing at him and shouting at him. And he's like, "Wow, I didn't expect that." So it interrupted his sort of train of thought, stopped him, thinking what he needed to do. But most importantly, stopped him convincing that I know of what he found. So I took the jacket off him and I started folding it up really carefully, put it back in a plastic bag really slowly, all at the time screaming abuse at him. And he's like, "What?" And then I start walking away really slowly. Run away from a pack of wolves. They'll follow you, they'll chase you and win. Yeah. So I went as slow as I could. And I'm still shouting over my shoulder. Anyway, I get halfway across the car park and I hear these footsteps running behind me. I'm thinking, all right, I've got halfway. I'm thinking maybe if I swing around, get one punch in, and then that was my plan. I turn around and it's my mate with this bit of crack. He says, "Hey, mate, don't mind my mate. He's a dickhead." And I says, "Yeah, he is a dickhead." God. And he's just picking at my clothes. And his mate is screaming from him at the car, saying, "Don't do it, man. He's fucking 5'0", but he's not listening because he wants to give me this crack." So he gives me this crack cocaine. It's all captured perfectly on the camera as well, like framed perfectly.
Wow.
And I give him the £20 note, all exchange. And then I started walking away. When he went back, then of course there's shouting and arguing. And I get to the edge of the car park, but then I hear the car wheels, the accelerator going, and it's zooming across the car park, wheels spinning. I think, shit, it's time to run now. I start running. I get to the main road, which is actually a dual carriageway near the centre of Leicester. I'm quite near to a roundabout, so I'm running along the pavement. The car comes up me after me along the pavement, trying to run me down. But I got to the point where, because it's a roundabout, you have a steel barrier separating the pavement from the dual carriageway where you get a roundabout.
Yeah.
I just got to that point, and the car had to cram its brakes on. And I looked behind, it must have missed me by about 2 meters. So then it bumped off the pavement and then went around the roundabout a couple of times. But then from where I was, I could walk towards the pedestrian area. So I was pretty safe quite quickly. I got back to the secret location, explained to the team what had happened, told them the number plate, the description of the people. The intel guy from the cell went away and came back after he'd done the number plate. He was laughing. He says, "Wow, I don't know why they didn't just shoot you, because there's loads of intel. They've got a gun in that car." And we all laughed about it. It's funny what you laugh about, especially a bunch of cops with a situation like that. But the point is, and to the question that you raised, at what point do you show out? Well, I knew the caliber of these people, and I strongly suspected that if I'd admitted to who I was, that would have ended up in serious violence or my death, because they were not rational gangsters. They were extremely violent people. Mm-hmm. So from my survival's point of view, there was never a scenario where I was going to admit anything. My last breath would have been denial, because that was the safest route with those characters. That's not to say I might not have found myself in a different sort of situation with different characters, where my best bet at survival would have been admitting who I was. But again, that's a judgment call, and those are the judgment calls in which you put your life on, really.
Obviously you're talking about the kind of how violent these characters are, and you've dealt with a lot of violent gangs in their role in kind of the drug trade. Has there been times where you've been attacked, or has it all been kind of like bark louder than bite? I mean, I know that they have that bite, but have you been involved in any of that?
Yeah, I have. I haven't been assaulted that many times. It normally is just threats, and there's lots of threats. And there's certainly lots of times I thought it was going to be imminent violence. But I'll tell you about a young man in Leicester, same operation actually, that I've just described. And this one's important because quite often I talk to a lot of police. I travel around the world. I speak to all sorts of police audiences to try and make them realise the folly of what we do in drugs policing. And quite often they will say, "Yeah, but you've just told us you caught these horrible gangsters, and you just told them how violent they are, and you just told us that at the end of the operation you caught them." But the point is, you have to ask the question: where do these people come from? Many of these gangsters were not sat in a classroom at the age of 12 thinking, I'm going to move into the world of organised crime, and I'm going to have to learn how to be violent to survive. Yeah. They weren't thinking that. It's policy that's created this environment where you have to be successfully ruthless and violent in order to secure your, to control the market, in order to earn the money, to outdo your rivals, to intimidate people so you don't get grassed up to the police. So young people are learning how to be violent. I'll tell you about a young man at Leicester, and he was the first child that I bought heroin from, actually, in 2001. Nowadays, of course, it's normal. Their children are on the front line, but then it was really shocking. He was 16. And when I met him, he was a really nice young man. He was quite funny. You could have a laugh with him. But in the space of a 6 or 7 month operation, I saw him turn from a pleasant 16-year-old with a jovial sense of humor to a terrifying 17-year-old. And the last time I bought heroin from him, as we were walking on the street, he reached over, as we were going past the lamppost, he smashed my head into this lamppost. And that was just him letting me know who was boss. That was him developing his reputation. That was him learning the skills he needed to survive, and learning the skills that his peers were telling him he needed to learn. And I saw that change. It was a conscious decision. And that's what we need to remember here, because then I'm as guilty of this as anybody in creating a stigma around drug dealing. I know I'm guilty of this because in the media, it's part of the narrative that's important I need to tell. But 99% of the drug dealers I've ever met have been lovely people who don't actually use violence. But the people who control the heroin and crack cocaine trade and make the real money from it, and to a certain degree, some of the other commodity trades as well, some places like methamphetamine or whatever, they've learned to control it with violence. But it's policy that's created that. If prohibition hadn't existed, most of them would not have ended up developing the need to behave in a ruthless and violent way. This is policy that's created this. It's policy that's it's making our young men violent. It's policy, it's prohibition that's behind the rise in knife crime, in territorial disputes. Because, if doctors, governments, and licensed pharmacies controlled the drug supply, there would be no knife disputes over who sells to who. There would be no corrupting of children, and there would be no learning of how to become a good little gangster.
Before we go into how you want to affect policy and change and how you think perhaps you were part of the problem, I want to go back to when you were undercover. You can't change your face. That's quite obvious. What happens when you're not undercover? Are you not just really aware that at any moment someone could go, hang on, I know that guy? Are you not just really scared all the time?
I'm not scared now.
No, I mean back then when you were deep in it and people knew your face in the underworld, were you not just constantly looking over your shoulder?
Well, I was. Yeah, I mean, the last 3 lengthy jobs that I did. I understand now after seeing 3 psychiatrists, multiple therapists, psychiatric nurses, doctors. I now understand that I already had PTSD during the last 3 operations that I did. And it wasn't just hypervigilance for the sake of staying alive that I had. And I actually had a scare once because in the job I did in Northampton, I remember I jumped in a taxi with 2 other people who were looking to score. And one of the guy who was paying for the taxi, who seemed to suspiciously have loads of money, I suddenly recognized him and I thought, holy shit, where do I know you from? And he looked at me and he says, where do I know you from? And I'm thinking it was from the job in Leicester about 3 years before. And I just couldn't, and I knew I'd talked to him before. We knew each other. And it was like, that was the most uncomfortable taxi ride of my life because he wasn't just a vulnerable consumer, a vulnerable person who problematically using drugs. This guy, there was something about him. He was some kind of traveling criminal. So that was horrendous because I knew we were going to meet some people who were dangerous as well. And then so it did happen, I pushed my luck because I did the work over almost 14 years. So I definitely pushed my luck. Although, I moved from one city to another and most of the people were specific to a city, but it is the nature of organized crime that it's interconnected. So yeah, I pushed my luck.
You mentioned kind of about PTSD. Was there a moment, when was the moment that you realized, I guess, that you had PTSD or you needed to maybe, obviously only if you're okay with talking about it, that you need to maybe seek some help, after the trauma that you'd been through?
Yeah, I don't mind talking about my mental health at all because one of the things that I talk about publicly is PTSD and mental health within policing, etc. Because I feel duty bound to try and break down that stigma, and there is a lot of stigma. It's incredible, especially within policing, because I've had many colleagues who've had serious physical injuries, a broken back or whatever it is, and colleagues will rally around them and treat them wonderfully. But as soon as you've got any kind of illness which is mental, you're ostracized completely. You're treated with suspicion. You're treated like the enemy, actually. It's appalling. But when did I realize? I mean, my mental health declined, I suppose, it became obvious to me around one of the last operations I did in Brighton, where what I was hearing on the streets is that some of the homeless people had actually been murdered by giving them a toxic dose of heroin. And whether this was true or not, I can't say it was because I don't have the evidence. But certainly many people believed that it was because of some of the deaths that happened in the circumstances in which they'd upset some of the organised crime groups. The fact that my colleagues were treating this with humour rather than any serious consideration was, it was starting to make me realise that there was some, this was really affecting our mental health. So, but I stopped doing undercover work, and then eventually I just, after a few years, my work was just struggling. I didn't really understand what was happening to me, and I had a real mental health collapse. Around that time, I realized that one of the things that was making me ill was the fact that I do not believe in the police, what the police were doing with drugs, and that even though I'd stopped working undercover, I was still part of investigating serious organized crime, and I couldn't support the policy that the police are tasked to carry out. I couldn't do it. And the fact that I was part of this organization was making me mentally ill. I felt like I was, it's probably too strong a term, but it felt like I was working for the enemy. This policy was harming people who needed help. And this is the state resources that was doing this. So I suppose it was a moral conflict. And actually, I'm not just diagnosed with PTSD. I also have moral injury, which is the sort of sister illness of PTSD. And that's mental harm, which is caused by the fact that I've harmed other people.
Do you feel kind of guilty because of, I guess, lower down the pecking order in terms of people who are addicts or really dependent on heroin and crack and stuff like that they ended up, some of them might have ended up going to prison or is it more kind of to do, I guess, with there was more drugs being put on the street, or that gang violence was getting more fervent because police work wasn't working?
All of it, but mostly because of the effect on the vulnerable individuals. Because, when I used to go into a city centre area, I would look for the most vulnerable person, because the most vulnerable person is the easiest to manipulate. Now, if that sounds ruthless, well, of course it's ruthless. It is ruthless. That's the point. It is a feature of not just undercover policing, but it's a feature of drugs policing. This idea that we can arrest vulnerable people in order to try and solve some broader problem. It's just causing harm to vulnerable people, and I was part of that. So, yeah. So it's about the effect that I had on vulnerable people, really. It was against my core values, and it took me many years to realize that I was working very hard against my own value system.
And that led to kind of moral injury, yeah.
Yeah, that's where the moral injury comes from, yeah.
Obviously, that kind of led you to your moral kind of discomfort with how things were going with the police, led you to quit. Could you talk about, I guess, the moments leading up to you leaving the police, and where where your mind was at in terms of where to take your life, like after that? Obviously, you've gone into kind of your activism, but obviously that's a big. Did you know you wanted to jump into that whilst you were thinking about leaving the police?
Yeah, so I went off sick because I wasn't capable of working, and I was making mistakes, a lot of mistakes, which of course then I got treated with suspicion. So instead of being treated with any care by my organisation, I was investigated and treated with suspicion. Now, it shouldn't have been very complicated for my management to work out why I was having difficulties, right? It's a matter of record somewhere, the work that I did, the things that I'd been through, but none of that was considered. It was horrendously hostile, which meant that the months that I spent off sick were really, really difficult. Now, during that period of time when I was off sick, I was thinking, well, what do I do? I don't belong there, so what am I going to do? And I spent that time just contemplating and thinking, well, somehow I have to use my knowledge to contribute to the movement for reform, somehow. And I'd spent a couple of years really reading everything I could about all of the academic evidence, the history of the British system, and also read about the activities of organizations which would come on to be my allies. So I read all of the documents by Transform Drug Policy Foundation, for example, all of the stuff that's put out by Release, who are based in London. And I started my active. So I resigned thinking I am going to become an activist. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I don't know how yet. I'm going to have to sort my mental health out first, but I don't know how I'm going to do it. And I wrote an email to a brilliant woman called Neve Eastwood, and she's the director of Release, who they're lawyers essentially, but they're also activists, and they're really clever because they study the data. They study the data of the actual the racial disparity of stop and search, for example, for drugs, and all of these kind of really useful bits of data. And I just basically offered my services, and I said, "Hey, Neve, I love what you do. I'm leaving the police. How do I get into this? How can I help you?" And she directed me to LEAP, which was the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, run in the UK by a brilliant man called Jason Reed, who actually runs a podcast, the Stop and Search podcast, that people might be interested in. So he was responsible for LEAP UK, but then I went on to become a board member of LEAP in the USA.
Could you kind of contextualize, I guess, what LEAP believes in, and also your beliefs on, obviously you talk about how prohibition has harmed, or I guess furthered on, the drug problem around the world, but also in this country. Could you talk about, your beliefs on decriminalization and kind of regulated legalization of drugs?
Yeah, certainly. I should make a point as well that because I always get told off for not mentioning things like this because I'm crap at promoting myself. I should mention that the thing that's really managed to give me a platform is the fact that I wrote a book as well, Good Cop, Bad War, which is a memoir of my undercover work. And then I, with J.S. Raffaele, I wrote a history of drug policy, and it is more exciting than that sounds. It's called Drug Wars. So there's those books which helped. But the position of my organization and myself is that we need legal regulation, legal control of drugs to take the power away from organized crime. And there's various reasons for this. I mean, I did an operation, which I haven't talked about particularly today with this, but I did an operation infiltrating a gang called the Burger Bar Boys in Northampton. And I thought I was going to die on multiple occasions during that operation over 7 months. And at the end of it, I'd gathered more evidence against more people than any of the operations I'd done. I got evidence against 96 people, the 6 main gangsters, 90 other people. There was hundreds of cops involved. And when the dust had settled, we'd managed to interrupt the drug supply in Northampton for only 2 hours. Now, that's a dramatic failure. That's a dramatic futility, incredible futility. But it's not just futility, because wherever you create a gap in the market, violence goes up. Well, not every time, but more often than not. Because whatever the police activity, whether it's an arrest of a gang or it's a big seizure of drugs, it never reduces the size of the market. The market stays the same and has been steadily growing. So if police never reduce the size of the market, and all of that energy, all of those cops, hundreds of cops, and all of those arrests, all of those doors being smashed in, that's a lot of energy. It has to do something, right? If it's not reducing the size of the energy, what does it do? Well, it changes the shape of that market, change the shape of it. So you get 2 or more actors coming in to compete for the opportunity you've created, and you get an increase in violence. We now have evidence from Brown's University in the United States from last summer that particularly in the opioid market, where the police have a success, they arrest the dealer, overdoses go up because people use different dealers. They're using a supply they're not used to. It destabilizes the supply. And overdoses increase.
It's mental.
You also get an increase in consumption because where people don't compete with violence, they compete with price drops. You get 2-for-1 deals. So consumption goes up.
Yeah.
So the intended effect of policing the drug markets has a dramatically different effect and generally has a completely negative effect. But there's another very, very important impact that drugs policing has on the market and our nations, and that is corruption. In the operation in Nottinghamshire, I actually had a cop who came into the operation halfway through, which is not meant to happen, because you're meant to operate like a terrorist cell, completely separate from normal policing, to safeguard my safety against corruption. Actually, that's why those systems are in place. And this cop I was introduced to, I was instantly suspicious of, and I refused to have him involved, refused to have him in the briefing or know what we were doing. The boss of the operation excluded him, and I was reassured, and I put it out of my mind. But a year later, when the infamous gangster Colin Gunn was arrested, it turned out that this cop I'd taken an instinctive suspicion of, intense dislike to, was an employee of Colin Gunn. He was part of the gangsters. Wow. And he wasn't corrupted while he was in the police. He was corrupted. He was paid to join the police.
Oh, wow. No. So they've got undercovers?
He was an undercover. Yeah, he was an undercover gangster. Yeah. So he was paid £2,000 a month on top of his police wages, plus bonuses when he got good information, which meant that the opposition got closer to my inner circle than I did to theirs, a lot closer. And this is because they have more resources, and their operation is refined, and they don't have to play to any rules. Now, this is important, and it's a really and it intersects with another piece of work that I'm doing. I'll tell you about in a moment if you'll bear with me. The reason that organized crime can corrupt our systems is not just because of the value in the business. The drug markets, taken overall, is the 4th or 5th biggest business in the world. It's bigger than textiles in value, and we're all wearing textiles. That's how much power there is in this unregulated and untaxed business. But it's not just the value of the market, it's how we police it, which increases the corruption. Because just as a rough analogy, say the police catch a heroin dealer who controls half of the heroin supply in the city of Birmingham. Okay, as I've described, you create a gap in the market, you get some violence, people fight over the opportunity. But the person or gang or kingpin character or whatever it is who is most able to take up that opportunity is the person who controls the other half of the city. Which means that policing activity in the drug marketplace increases monopolies. And in fact, some organized crime groups use the police informant system in order to get rid of rivals so that they can expand their share of the market. So over time, we're constantly refining the business effectiveness of organized crime. And if you increase your share of the market, or you decide to cooperate with another gang and form a cooperative, you increase your share of the market, you have more disposable income. And if organized crime has more disposable income, they will always invest it in corruption. And I mean always. And this has happened. And this efficiency in corruption has been happening year after year, more and more, for decades, to the point that now the Global Initiative into Transnational Organized Crime in 2021 declared that the growing power of transnational organized crime is the single biggest threat to our security and our democratic way of life. It's become huge. We've got narco states now, Honduras, Guinea-Bissau. We're watching the destruction of the democracy of Ecuador almost on a weekly basis as organized crime take over. Narco states, because it's more cost effective to take over an entire government than it is an individual police officer or customs official. And what this also means, and this is another piece of work I'm working on with a coalition, is that we can't deal with the climate crisis. Because all of these equatorial countries which are being corrupted by drugs organized crime can go to the next COP, they can go and sign the next treaty to stop deforestation, but that signature means nothing if they don't control their own backyard. It means nothing. Because the single most important thing for the climate crisis and for climate justice is governance, good governance. Prohibition, drug prohibition, is destroying world governance and removing our ability to deal with the biggest crisis of our existence.
We had some people. We had the Steve Murphy and Javier Pena on a couple episodes ago who helped catch Pablo Escobar. With your kind of history of drug knowledge, and you talk about narco states, you talk about kind of, Central South America and that kind of stuff. How different or how much worse is nowadays with the drug landscape compared to Pablo Escobar's era, I guess, of drug dominance?
Well, it's perpetually got worse. It's got worse in ruthlessness and violence with every single passing. The arrest of a high profile kingpin is just theatre. It's nonsense. Who cares? It's not made any difference at all. Law enforcement celebrates the arrest of Pablo Escobar as some kind of success. It's nonsense. It's not made any impact. Senior cops will go in front of the cameras and they've had this big seizure or this arrest of a kingpin, and they'll say, "We have successfully disrupted the activities of drugs organized crime." And they keep using this word disruption, and it's increasingly being used. Now, it's stunning to me because I've studied the economics of the international drug trade, and they use this disruption word like it's a success, like they've done something good. And that's the reality of drugs policing, whether you arrest a kingpin or whatever. Because arresting a kingpin, arresting a gang, seizing the biggest amount of cocaine ever does not reduce the size of the market, and demand in the market will always be met. You've now got even 1 gram deals of cocaine being 100% pure right across Northern Europe quite often, or the west coast of America. This is not. That's the net result of constantly disrupting the market.
Obviously, now going forward, you're trying to change the drug world in a different way. You're trying to change policy. But looking back on your career, do you have pride in what you did? Because what you did was, it was on a human level, it was an incredible thing to do. But do you look back and are you proud of what you did, or are you totally dismissive of it?
No, I'm totally dismissive, to be honest. I'm not proud of it at all. It caused harm, and that's all it did. There was no positive benefits at all to any of the work I did in drugs policing. However, I don't regret it, because the fact that I have those experiences and it prompted me to learn, and it prompted me to go into activism and develop in a different way, it's allowed me to use those tools and those storytelling to make other people understand. So I can't regret it because it's too useful, right?
Okay, yeah.
It's a path, the logical path that I followed. But proud of it? God, no.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an honest answer. I appreciate it.
Lastly, Neil, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your time. There's been points of this, and again, I know you're not proud of it, or you're dismissive of, I guess, your undercover work. But when you were telling those stories, it did feel like we were sat around a campfire.
I could listen to you talk these stories all day.
So, if you ever want to come back on in the future and say more stories,
very
absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously talk about your important activism. But I do want to ask, obviously, your kind of idea of ending all drug prohibition, or not your idea, but your belief. I know there are some people who may find that either shocking or too much to kind of wrap their head around. If we could give you a soapbox to speak to people who maybe aren't fully on board with that idea, what would you say to them?
I'd say this is about getting control of something that's out of control. So if people are worried about drugs, well, that's because the current policy situation has made them worried. Everything that's negative about drugs which is talked about is because of prohibition. Drugs are dangerous. People are overdosing because they're not regulated. They're controlled by organized crime. We worry about our children. Of course, parents, we don't want our children to have access to drugs. So the idea of legal regulation frightens us. But actually, legal regulation is about protecting our children. That's what drug policy should be about. And we now know from where cannabis is legal in the United States or in Canada that they've had a reduction in underage consumption of cannabis. And that's in every single jurisdiction where cannabis is legal for adult consumption, which proves that legal regulation, legal governmental control protects our children better than prohibition. Because a licensed pharmacist or a retail shop licensed to sell cannabis has to ask you for your ID. A dealer doesn't care how old you are. He doesn't care. So this is about control, and it's about saving lives, and it's about taking the power away from organized crime. And there's never going to be a perfect system, because drugs are a pain in the arse for policy, because they can be dangerous. But what I'm advocating is for following the evidence, because the evidence backs me up clearly. Where they've regulated heroin in Switzerland and the Netherlands, they don't have heroin deaths. They don't have children dealing it. Where they've regulated cannabis, we have less children using it. We have better health outcomes. Most importantly, we don't have money going into the pockets of organised crime, which is corrupting our justice systems or politicians or police officers. This is urgent now, as I've explained, because of the climate, because this is preventing our ability to deal with the climate crisis. So, yeah, I understand people's fears. I absolutely understand. Of course, we've had decades of the media making us scared. Even dramas which play into tropes and stigmas. There's a lot of bullshit talked about drugs. And, I didn't care at all as a police officer about personal liberty, or I didn't care that much about human rights, if I'm absolutely honest. But this also is now clearly a human rights issue, that governments are using drug policy to interfere with our human rights. And so it's not unreasonable to say, as an individual, that what I do with my mind and my body is my choice, as long as I'm not hurting anybody else. And we should all fight for that principle, because in so doing, we will help end drug prohibition and make society a much safer place. And I'll just leave with one thought as well, one last thought. If people are worried about the growth of authoritarian regimes, if people are worried about the growth of fascism, or however you want to frame it, I don't really want to use too much of a loaded term, but if people are worried about a swing in a certain type of politics, well, you can even lay that at the door of drug prohibition. Because if you look at Sweden, they've had open warfare between drug gangs. They've had 130 explosions in the last 12 months of organized crime fighting each other. The one explosion used to be headline news that doesn't even reach the news now in Sweden. And they've only got a 10 million population. That's drug prohibition that's done that. But many of the politicians are blaming immigration rather than the drug markets and drug prohibition. People are scared, and so people will go to the politics of fear. And you can lay that at the foot of prohibition, because prohibition is increasing fear in our communities. It's making our communities feel less safe. It's increasing the fear of crime, and it's interfering with the way people see the world.
Honestly, I think it's such an important.
I think it's impossible to. I mean, it's very difficult to disagree with what you've just said.
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely
see how you would disagree with the way you've just worded that.
Yeah, and like you say as well, people can do the research because the facts, do back that up. I think it's just hard for people to wrap their heads around, because it seems so hard line. Maybe when you put it into words of like, if you say legalize all drugs, people's heads will fall off.
So personally, I'm a prison abolitionist. Not actively. I don't do anything, but and that's impossible to try and put into people's minds and try and fix. I think that's essentially an impossible task. But in a perfect world, I don't think prisons exist. But it's by the by.
Well, at least 90% of people do not believe should not be in prison. At least 90%.
Yeah.
And we should strive towards a society where abolitionism is an ideal.
Absolutely.
So in that regard, and with medical understanding, social justice understanding, you can. I don't think you can ever rule prison out, because I've met some genuinely evil people. That's a controversial statement. I know that, but I'm very much aligned with your principles as an abolitionist.
Yeah,
that most people shouldn't be in prison. And actually, you send people to prison. Drugs are more expensive in prison. you come out with debt bondage and you have to commit more crime and you're exploited by organised crime.
Yeah, it's
So
just
that
a big
makes for
circle.
drug policy, for drug policy, it makes sending people to prison very, very stupid indeed.
Yep.
Like really, very, very stupid.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think it's such a fascinating thought to end on as well. Neil, thank you so much for your time. I know we've had to push this back and stuff like that. So thank you for being so flexible with us as well.
Appreciate it a lot.
And we'll make sure to leave your links to your books in the description as well for anyone who wants to check it out.
Okay, and thank you very much for that. And I'll also send you a link to the website for the Climate Coalition.
Absolutely.
And a link to our first publication, and with a plea that we're a new organisation fighting this intersection with the climate crisis. We're trying to get people to the COP in Brazil. We need help. We need financial support. We need people to improve our website. If anyone wants to get involved, please get in touch with me.
Fantastic,
Absolutely,
Neil. Thank you so much. And we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
People want the high five. There's your high five.
There's your high five.